Hey there.
Hello.
Let's just jump right in. We got a lot to get through.
Yeah, today we're going to be discussing, at times reading pieces of, when I think it's a really cool part anyway. We'll read, pieces of, snippets of, and give our thoughts on a book called Blackshirts Reds, Rational Fascism and the Overthrow of Communism by Michael Parenti.
If you haven't read it yet, don't worry. It's a shorty. You could probably just pause and go do that in like a day and get back to us. But if you're like, nah, I'm not doing that, you're in the right place. We're going to give you the TLDR.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely second that readability of this. So I'm a very slow reader. And actual dedicated reading days, this did not take me long. And then I went back, like I revisited, right? And I was able to pretty much skim through most of it in like a day.
Yeah. It's super easy to wrap your head around. There's no really weird jargon or anything. It's very relatable.
Yeah, that's, I think, a huge strength of this work. If we're going ahead and giving some ratings up top. Great stuff in terms of accessibility, in terms of not sounding like an asshole, trying to make you be like, oh, what is, critical Marxist subjectivity or something. I don't know, like really weird stuff that you're just like, I don't get it. What is some theory you do need to know at some point. You got to look up and try to figure out what reification is and complicated things like that. But it's not it's not great for everybody to see that first,
Exactly. Yeah. I think I don't know if I'd say this is an introductory text, but it's maybe secondary level.
Yeah, I would say this doesn't have a lot to reach out to non-leftists. I would say, you pretty much have to be convinced of leftism at least, but beyond, and then probably be like at least sympathetic to socialism and communism.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, like what a good curriculum for approaching this book would be. And I was like, maybe Open Veins first and then this one, because Open Veins would really set you up for like seeing the horrors of capitalism, particularly in the third world, and particularly as it relates to imperialism and all these like counter revolutions that have been fueled by the US. And then picking this book up, you'd be like, oh yeah, that I did just see that happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is Open Veins is great for enraging, and I think it's written from such a like regular person perspective. I don't know how to put that, but like,
it's poetic almost.
Yeah, and it's captivating, and it's like, it doesn't really tell you need to be a communist or anything, but you come out of like, man, a lot of the shit I was told was fucked up.
Yes, it's very eye-opening, and I think that opens your eyes, and this then peels back more layers.
Right, like I know that I've been lied to a lot. In what ways?
All right, let's jump in.
One disclaimer, my dog is freaking out from storms, so if you hear chaos in the background, it is him. He is cute, but not this cute. He's not cute enough to earn what he's doing right now, but that's fine. We're fighting for a world where he doesn't have to earn anything. He can just be and be valued for that.
Poor guy. Okay, chapter 1, Rational Fascism.
The descriptor here is, fascism historically has been used to secure the interests of large capitalist interests against the demands of popular democracy. Then and now, fascism has made irrational mass appeals in order to secure the rational ends of class domination.
As I started trying to summarize this chapter, I'm like, this really is a lot of the points we covered in our episode on fascism. So if you want to re-listen to that, you totally can. Basically goes over kind of the history of both Mussolini and Hitler's rises to power and how they are, weirdly happening parallel to a socialist rise in power.
Yeah, it's like, it's not two sides of the same coin, but it's like equal and opposite reaction, like Newtonian shit, And that's for a reason. We described fascism as like capitalism when it's cornered, or, capitalism with the mask off. It's capitalism in reaction to, a rise in worker militancy, a rise in leftism.
Definitely. Like, basically the economic cycle is workers start getting more rights. They start organizing. They start unionizing. They start winning labor issues. The companies are like, hey, I still need my profits, bro. And so they turn to these right-leaning forces to suppress labor. And that's how you get fascism.
Yeah, so he uses this example of fascist Italy, fascist Germany, as like the prototypical example of fascism in a corner, you know. But I think you can go beyond that. Like, we've seen this before that time period. If you think back to the old Gilded Age, the strike breakers, them using like the Pinkertons and everything, setting tent villages on fire to, you know, literally smoke out striking workers. Before you have any sort of concept of true anti-communism, you have this anti-laborism there. You know, after that, I mean, take your pick. All the gruesome things that this country and companies have done to fight against any sort of worker militant, you know, tendency of any sort. When capitalism realizes, hey, these guys are a threat to us, and these niceties of individual rights, these pleasant liberal democratic values that we talk about, when they're getting in the way of stomping down the workers who need to be put in their place, the capitalists will just throw that out the window. They don't give a shit about that unless it's convenient to them.
It's a narrative you don't hear much, even when you do talk about like these horrible regimes like Nazism and Mussolini. Like, you don't hear about the fact that like communists were oppressed. Like, that's never listed under the groups of oppressed people. It's I mean, not to diminish anything from the other groups, but it's just like, you're missing a piece of the story here that just does not get told.
Yeah, and it's an important part, I think, that we're familiar with, we know about, but like someone new coming to the story wouldn't know about, is like, how did the Nazis really, and the Italian fascists get their start, is by street fighting against communists. And, you know, even before that, I mean, like strike breaking and everything, you know, being in the employ of big business. But in the ever weakening Weimar Republic, the Nazis were essentially used, I mean, that's where the term comes from, stormtroopers. They were used as like shock troops against like demonstrating communists and stuff. And the communists had their own like fighting bands and stuff. And it's just that the Nazis won, you know, and so they got to take power.
Yeah, I mean, I think it says a lot when, you know, the fucking stormtroopers were fucking breaking up strikes. Like, okay, maybe which side of strikes should you be on?
Yes, exactly. But people don't make this connection nowadays because that history is obscured in one, you know, for one reason. And for another, people just don't connect modern day strike breaking with any sort of historical. I think he gets into it later with like the whole like Marxism can illuminate the world for you, and you can see connections between things that you otherwise wouldn't see. People see so many things as like disconnected events.
I mean, I will say I think he does a good job of tying it to maybe more current day conservatives at the end of the chapter. He talks about like, I mean, their rhetoric is ripped from the pages of fascism. He talks about Reagan-esque optimism, media-hyped crowd pleasers, convincing people that the government is the enemy, especially the social service sector, strengthening the repressive capacities of the state, instigate racist hostility. Like, that's the fucking playbook, man.
Yeah. And doing it all while under this sort of guise, and he gets into like how the fascists did this, but like under this guise of like, oh, we're very revolutionary. Like, look at us making big changes, you know? In this one section, he talks about like, who did the fascists support? Because, you know, you'll always get this of like, they had socialism in their name, and like, so that should be on the left. But like, he kind of makes it clear, hey, the fascists, when they got into power, people don't like to talk about like what they did. They just say like, oh, they were evil, and they were, because they like killed millions of people, but they like pretend that that's their only policy. Whereas that their overall policy was pro-business, anti-union, anti any sort of cooperative economy or whatnot, worker co-ops, anything like that. They were like relentless about slashing wages, about increasing profits by that. They brought child labor in Italy. He talks about just like anything to make the rich get richer.
Yeah, completely funneling it all to big business. And it's almost like, and then he talks about how Hitler's portrayed as very fanatical and almost like ascetic. And it's almost like not a cover up of like mustache twirling, but an effort to portray them as like they are purely only racist and ideological, instead of zooming out to see the larger picture of like, no, like Hitler had a slush fund made up of defense contracts.
Yeah. He was a war profiteer. They kind of make him out to be this Bond villain or whatever, but like, where the hell did he get his Bond villain like secret lair? His fucking castle, with all the guard wolves or whatever the fuck. He got that from like fucking stolen money. Like it was ripped off from the government.
Yeah, and if you want to look at the other side, okay, who the Nazis supported and who supported the Nazis, like we got some damning evidence there too of like, you always hear like, oh yeah, a few people were into Hitler, and maybe what's that guy? The
Edward
the
VIII.
Prince. Yes. I always just picture the guy from the King's Speech because my brain is rotted. Handsome prince. But I mean, you have major newspapers being like, oh no, let's hear this guy out. You have fucking Randolph Hearst, who owned all the major newspapers, being like, yeah, well, let's have a fucking Nazi column.
Right. I thought that was hilarious, and I remember trying to find the op-eds, if I could find them, from Hermann Goring in Hearst papers. Like apparently they'd let them do guest columns. Like
I'm picturing like a really vapid like Sunday morning with Hermann Goring. Like he's like, first I have my brunch,
Yeah.
Like a horrible like Atlantic
fashion
or New Yorker
column?
piece.
Like,
yeah. A horrible little op-ed.
Oh, that would be great. But yeah, like not just that,
How to girl boss in Germany.
Like you had the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, Fortune. He named other papers too that had, where the fascists had admirers. That people were saying, how we receive it in American history. People say, well, the fascists made the trains run on time or something like that, to that effect. And that's what people were saying then too. It's like, well, they have their detractors, but they make things efficient, and they're building this new democracy and stuff like that. And really, this only changes once like the war clouds start gathering. And he kind of phrases this as like once the expansionism of these fascist states starts colliding with the capitalists' own spheres of influence and saying, hey buddy, this is our turf. Like,
you actually can't do that.
Yeah.
Love the oppression, don't love the taking over my shit part. All right, can we talk about this crazy play?
Oh, yes, let's do it. So this is in the section, the rational use of irrational ideology. And he's kind of talking about how fascists, one of the elements of fascism is subsuming the individual to the will of the state. It's like, it's the characterization of war as the health of the state. Like, we don't want peace. We want everyone like mobilized. We want everyone like being an organic part of the state. It's very collaborationist. It's trying to like hide the shitty elements of capitalism by saying, no, we're all on the same team. And that's kind of where he introduces this kind of bizarre Nazi play.
It's called Schlageter? No idea. Sorry, German listeners. But they print a scene from it where like the dad is like old school and like the kid is the cool hip fascist, and he's like, Dad, you don't even get it.
Yeah, I love the dad. I stand the dad.
He's asking questions like, what are you doing? Like, what is going on here? And he's just like, Dad, you don't even understand. Like, no one uses the slogans anymore. Class struggle's over. Like, come on, get with it. Try to be hip, Dad.
And yeah, no, it's brilliant. In the play, he says, the kid says upper, lower, poor, rich. That always exists. None of us regards making money as the most important thing. We want to serve.
That is such a telling way to put it, of like, money doesn't even matter, or like, that's gross that you care that much about money, and like putting it in those terms of just like, oh, we're all just people, that kind of like kumbaya bullshit, but like serving a nefarious purpose.
Yeah, and how many, ideologies that are acceptable in polite society kind of have that little kernel, right? Mainstream Christianity will do this. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, don't be very material, right? Mm-hmm. Or
Or even everyone has their place. Like, oh, you're on your path.
Yeah. You have a role to play, or like the whole workings of the universe, right? That's beyond our understanding. Or classic liberalism, right? Or even, progressivism will still kind of fall into this sort of, hey, we're all Americans, and we all, we can come together, and what unites us is greater than what divides us, and stuff like that. I think one of the great strengths that he points out of fascism is its ability to dupe people into believing that we are all on the same team, and focus on that so much. And there's a reason why every sporting event in this country spends half an hour, the Department of Defense half hour at the beginning, with the jet flyovers and the big huge flag and all. There's a reason for that, of all that cheerleading and everything. Is we want you to focus on being on the same team, because while you're doing that, and while we want to serve, we're toiling away to do our part. Who are you doing that for? You're making piles of money for the rich, while you're thinking that you're actually, doing your part on the team.
Yeah, definitely. And even in like less politicized kind of views, like, listeners, if you hang out with enough rich people, at one point they're going to say like being rich isn't easy, like they're going to say more money, more problems to you.
Hey man, I'll trade you today.
I know, exactly. Like, give me your money then. Like, I'm sorry you're so sad.
Yeah,
but,
rich man's burden.
It comes up in that too. It definitely, like, there's this weird, it's like that fucking, who was that guy that we read? The charity guy that I hated. Carnegie. It's like, oh, I have such a responsibility. That kind of shit.
Yeah. It's bizarre. I mean, I don't think I would want to see this play, because obviously it's a Nazi play. But
no, I don't.
If I just ended up time traveling to that time, I would go ahead and go see it.
It sounds interesting in a horrible way.
If I could sneak in for free, I would not pay them.
No.
The next section there, I think, was pretty great.
Patriarchy and pseudo-revolution?
Yes.
Definitely. I mean, this gets to kind of who loses when you have fascism and why. Because, the narratives we're told about these regimes is that, like, they're just pure evil. They have, like, little devil horns, and they're just like, I love oppressing people. Which, some of them probably were sickos and did enjoy that. But the reasoning behind it is much more interesting. He starts off with homosexuality, with gay people. You do now are hearing more about how many gay people died during the Holocaust. And it was very interesting because he talks about how, like, at first it was, like, kind of chill to be a gay Nazi. Like, they didn't really care. But they used it as an excuse to clear ranks when the stormtroopers started talking about organizing and spreading the wealth and decrying decadence.
Yeah, so there was, and it was Nazi, so it was bad.
It's
and it was
still not good.
all the way through. But there's a little strand of it called Strasserism, or Strasserism, I don't know the German, but and essentially this was like the left-wing portion of Nazism. Yeah.
Okay.
Which, I mean, really did see itself as a pure, like a third way that was going to do all the racist shit and everything. Don't get me wrong.
Don't get me wrong.
Super
Super
was also
racist.
going to, like, do essentially socialism for the Volk, for the
white
Aryans.
people.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was kind of embodied in the essay, in the brown shirts, the original street brawling thugs. And it's them and Ernst Röhm, who is the, like, kind of chief, he's their chief, who he was openly homosexual. And this was just given a pass. And Hitler was kind of like, that's private matters, until basically the army came to him and said, hey, fucker, we're the army. You are not going to supersede us, and you better get your little thugs in place, or else, we're going to do a coup against you, basically. So in order basically to sew up, like, support from the conservative element, support from the army, support from, like, the SS, which was kind of budding at this time, he was like, fine, yeah. And, like, you're right, the excuse basically to clear ranks was they're degenerate homosexuals. And that was called the Night of the Long Knives. And that's when they just, like, went and fucking murdered, assassinated a whole bunch of people. He talks about Himmler having this real, like, homophobic bent to him, and misogynist, been to him. He's just, he's overall an asshole. I mean, Himmler, like he's
top tier asshole.
Yeah. but that's kind of where it stems from, is like the Nazis weren't coming out of the gate saying, oh, let's kill all the gays or anything like that. They just got there because of convenience.
Yeah. And then he kind of moves on to talk about like women, and it's similar, like absolutely a misogynist power structure, but you have to like look at the structure part of that sentence. Like, why are they misogynist? Well, they need women home to like have lots of babies so they can have more soldiers and more workers to feed into their war machine.
Yes, and I like, because this is like, he's giving you Engels without like telling you, hey, this is Engels and I'm smart for knowing it. But like,
Definitely.
this is like the origins of the family. What he wrote was, like the thing about the nuclear family is like, hey, if the nuclear family falls, if like the patriarchal father head of the household falls, then the rest of it's gone too. Like, we have to support the patriarchy at home so that people say, well, the Fuhrer is the father of the nation.
Exactly. And then I really love how he talks about, I guess, the way the fascists talk about revolution. I don't know, it's very creepy, like you see this stuff happening now, implying that all of this stuff is like a new order and like, oh, we're totally going to change the game, like using revolutionary language but around a fascist project. Like, they absolutely did that. They absolutely tried to act like this was a positive shakeup.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. When the right wing criticizes you and says, oh, you're socialist, but do you remember a party called the National Socialist Democrat? Yeah. And you're like, yeah, that, they were literally trying to co-opt that,
They were on the coattails.
The most popular mass party in Germany at that time was the Social Democratic Party. Like, I mean, that's what they were writing, and that's what they were trying to pretend to be revolutionary by. I like that he kind of very succinctly to me at the beginning of this section, just to backtrack a little, circled all of the traits of fascism as like being chauvinistic in terms of like kind of like nationalistic, being racist, being sexist, being patriarchal. Like, he's like, hey, all of this that it's doing is a way to defend capitalism. Like that it's just like tools it's using. As we were saying about the Nazis, how they didn't really fucking care till it came down to like, oh, hey, this works for us right now. Bam. Homosexuality bad. I think it's kind of another way to think about our conversations in the past about the importance of intersectional solidarity to the left as like a way to combat this, as a way of saying, like, any time that we are fighting these things, we're fighting capitalism. Even if it's not like your primary, oh, I'm most concerned about this, you're still taking part in it.
Yeah, because you look at the reasons behind oppressing those groups. You're oppressing women so they can have more babies. That's definitely happening. You're oppressing gay groups so that they don't have access to, like, healthcare. Like, that's definitely happening. You're also doing it to, like, enforce gender norms more. Like,
and reinforce the family structure that is, like, your microcosm of the state, the almighty state,
Yeah, and, like, race tensions, too. Those are stoked to cause fear and to make you turn more towards the police state.
Yeah, it gives you an other to fight against. You must, I know, hey, this guy, right, he's a banker and he makes more money than you, but he's of your race. He's of the Volk, and you've got to fight. And that's kind of what it all ties down to is building up enemies. And so left projects, I think, that try to ignore these oppressions through like any sort of like reductionism or whatever, right? We're just like, oh, it's just class. You're just putting big blinders on yourself for that. Or if you're even worse than that, if you're trying to make, crude appeals to the masses with these bigotries and saying, oh, I've got to reach the white working class, so we're just going to dabble a little bit in the racism.
Just a little bit of racism.
You're just doing the work of the fascists. Like, you're working for the other team, and that sort of a project, don't fall for it. It's doomed. It's bad. It's counter-revolution. I mean, it's against what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Can we talk about Gnome?
Let's talk about Gnome.
Oh my gosh, Gnome gets his ass ripped in this book like 10 times. Page 17 is his first appearance. The rise of corporations was in fact a manifestation of the same phenomena that led to fascism and Bolshevism, which sprang out of the same totalitarian soil. And I wrote in my notes in the margin, whoa, what the hell, Gnome?
Dude, Gnome repeatedly takes L's in this book.
He really does.
It's harsh. And I mean, I don't know, that's a bad take, right? Like, unless he's saying, most charitable reading. Let's try to defend our guy here.
Let's put our gnome glasses on.
He's not our guy, but like, he's saying that out of the same sort of sufferings of a people. I mean, people have to be desperate to turn to. People have to be really oppressed to turn to fascism, to turn to communism. Maybe, but no, I don't think that's what he's meaning. I think he's meaning, and it's made clear later that he's meaning, oh, they're totalitarian, they're, bad, they boss people around. I mean, come on, like, this guy is a world-class academic. You can disagree with him at any point. He's a brilliant mind.
And he's great at analyzing media, so it's really surprising to me that he falls for all these, tropes that I think the next chapter gets into of anti-communism on the left.
He's great at analyzing, he's great at analyzing media. He's great at breaking down, like, linguistic, syntactical, like, minutia. Like, this guy is smarter than this. So he's being anti-communist by doing it because he's not just, like, fucking up.
Even if he's doing it from where we kind of know his heart lies based on what we know about him, what I'm assuming where his heart still lies. I haven't talked to the guy yet,
I think he's still an anarcho-communist.
I think he's still anarcho-communist, but like it's again that kind of unity issue we always come up against is like you can't bring all of us down with that man. Like not right now. You're doing the other team's work for them.
Yeah, and I think in these instances where he makes these pronouncements, he could do better in terms of left unity. Like, you should be doing better.
All right. Next section is basically kind of revisiting, all right, who's all cozying up to fascists?
A who's who of assholes.
Basically, yeah. Basically all, not all, but a large amount of fascists in Italy and Nazi Germany were just like not tried. Like, and which I didn't know because you think about, the Nuremberg trials and you're like, oh, we got him. Apparently, we only got like what, a few?
Yeah, no, you got the high ups, but beyond that, and meanwhile in the GDR, what were they doing? They were removing 80% of judges and teachers and officials. Like that wasn't happening. In West Germany for sure. In the whole rest of the West. I mean, you had the Vatican-backed rat line project that was getting Nazis smuggled out of Europe to Argentina or whatever. So
yep.
Definitely. Basically, the denazification process really didn't exist. And not to say there weren't exceptions on the other side. I mean, the Soviet Union had its own version of like Operation Paperclip, where the United States like drew out Nazi scientists out and everything and used them for the rocket project. Like the Soviet Union had its own version of that to try to get German scientists or whatever. But basically, they just put them in a gulag and said, do science for us. And that was it. It wasn't like you got to live for free sort of thing.
Even to the point where people were working on like presidential campaigns. Like it was shocking.
What the fuck? Yeah. You had American companies like, little small mom and pop operations like Chase National Bank, DuPont, Ford, GM, getting to collect from the government after their like plants that had been producing war material for the Nazi army.
Insane.
And the Department of Defense comes out and tells its flyboys, hey, don't bomb these coordinates because that's where the GM facility is.
That's insane. How are you going to be making weapons for the fucking Nazis?
Yeah.
And get away with it.
And then, so those bombers say, okay, well, we're not going to go after that position. They go and bomb. I don't know. I kind of feel kind of humanist about this, or like less us versus them about it, but like just regular German civilians.
Yeah.
They go and bomb them in their housing blocks and everything to avoid your fucking munitions plant that's actually, fueling the war effort and killing Allied soldiers. They go and bomb somebody's grandma's house instead those people are using your place as an air raid shelter. It's crazy. And they got to collect money from the government as damages for bombing their place.
They got paid to make Nazi weapons. And then we also funded some terrorism. By we, I mean the CIA. Not me, personally.
Yeah, friend of the show, Dave and Dan, your colleagues down at Langley.
They're toasting right now, like, hey, that's us.
What's our canon? Are Dave and Dan CIA, NSA, FBI? Have we ever specified?
I don't even know. I think they're kind of all of them at
Dave
one
and
point
Dan,
or another.
Call in at some point. You have our numbers. Call in.
I'm sure
Tell
you
us
do.
what branch you are. We'd love to hear it.
They just hack into the recording, into the Zoom chat.
Live. They just pop in. We cannot confirm or deny.
Maybe we should add a third one so they can have one from each branch.
Ooh. Wow, yeah, that could be pretty good.
That'll be a listener contest of your name could be one of the surveillance people. You have to give us the best review ever on iTunes.
But yeah, we totally funded terrorism. We visited this in Operation Condor, kind of its roots in the World War II stay-behind networks and stuff. And they mention it here of the Masonic P2 Lodge and Operation Gladio. And what they and we're going into more detail here, I guess, than I did in covering this initially. But he talks about the strategy of tension, if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah. So basically just like kidnapping people, it seems like, and bombings and assassinations.
Yeah, the whole thing was to do domestic terrorism against your own country. And then when people started digging into it, find ways to like pin it on the Red Army faction, pin it on various communist organizations and say, oh, look at them. Things are unsafe. You've got to turn to strong leadership and, basically the fascist or quasi fascist alternative.
Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like the amount of blood on the hands of anti-communism is pretty big.
Yes. Yeah. The deaths of capitalism. They say, oh, millions and bajillions have been killed by communism. First of all, no. But second of all, let's turn the camera around.
Yeah, you want to talk numbers? Like, sit down.
We'll get to it later, but he does a section where he
does. I mean, it's the next chapter. Let's jump into it because I don't have anything else on this one.
All right, let's do it.
All right. I'm just going to give some numbers, just kind of jumping around between the first few pages of this chapter. In the Philippines, when we fucked around there with McKinley, slaughtered 200,000 Filipino women, men, and children. Quick list of countries. If you ever wondered how many countries we've invaded, I do all the time.
It's not even a complete list, but go ahead.
Not even a complete list, but we've got Hawaii, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, Mexico, Soviet Russia, Nicaragua, Honduras, Dominican Republic. Like, that's just a smattering. Laos and Cambodia, Vietnam, Korea.
China in the Boxer Rebellion.
Yeah. Chile, Brazil, Grenada, South Africa, Western Sahara, Zaire, Turkey. Like, so many, guys. We just did it all.
Yeah. And he leads off this chapter, I love, with just, he's great. As a history teacher, I'm like, damn, if I could get somebody to write a thesis statement like this, that's perfect. He does it great every time. Because he leads off and he says, U.S. foreign policy is devoted to the suppression of revolutionary governments and radical movements around the world. And then he just like says, proof, exhibit A, B, C. Like,
yeah, he has to fucking Z and then adds a new alphabet. Like, yeah.
Yeah, A, B, A, Z, yeah.
Like, he gives numbers here. We got, 2 million. I had to look at the zeros and determine how many there were. That's how many. 2 million North Koreans, 3 million Vietnamese, 500,000 in Laos and Cambodia, 1.5 million in Angola. Like, there's just too many. I didn't add them all up.
Millions and millions of humans, of people whose lives were cut short in pursuit of counter-revolution and in the name of freedom, is how he prefaces it. You can say, well, hey, I oppose that. I don't like that. That's not good. But China is doing this, or but North Korea is doing that, or but whoever. But you know what? You're a citizen of the United States. And when he says in the name of freedom, he's saying in your name. And he's saying you're a citizen of this country. The country ostensibly that you have the most influence over is this one. This is the thing that you can change, right? I don't know. This is how I think of it sometimes when people say, well, what about Russia or what about whatever? And it's like, yeah, maybe they're being an asshole. but like as an American, I should be trying to change what America is doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like in therapy, you can't control other people's actions, but you can control how you respond.
Yes, yeah, that's a little bit of praxis that slipped through the self-care filter that they usually have there. And it's all like kind of sold to us, he says, kind of in this myth of like protecting U.S. interests or
let's talk about that.
Thwarting aggression.
The presumptions of power section I thought was really, powerful. Not to just repeat the word, but okay, so basically these are very handy for when you have a militaristic family member or an acquaintance who's just like, I think that's all those numbers you just gave me are totally fine because, all right, option 1, they say, we have the right to define how other countries run themselves.
Why?
Why? There's no law that says that.
No, he just basically says, no, that's just you doing that because you're stronger.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, fine. Besides, we have a right to do that. We have to protect our national interests. We've talked about this one on the show before. Who is that?
Ladies and gentlemen, and everything else, like, do you have a national interest in what oil prices are in the United Arab Emirates? You have no idea. You could wake up one day and they're 20 cents more, 20 cents less. You have no clue, and it wouldn't affect your life in the least because you're not freaking CEO of Shell Oil. You're not one of these multinationals. You don't have that sort of connection. And when they say, "Oh, this is for American interests," it's for the board of executives or something, but it's not you.
Some Americans.
Yeah, the people who run the place, but like you're the person who picks up your trash, the person you pay at the movie theater, the person that regular people in your life. This is not them. They don't give a damn. And you don't either, because you're a normal person.
All right, next point. Well, we have a moral obligation to protect democracy. And these terrorists, these revolutionaries are messing it up. What do you say to that?
That's why we must side with Saudi Arabia, noted Democratic ally of the United States.
Our best friend.
We've got to side with who else? Bahrain, Kuwait. There's just so many allies of ours that are charitably described as less than democratic.
Okay. What about this? Well, I get if a country wants to change things up, but shouldn't they do it peacefully?
Let's follow the rules, please. What is the state trying to do in the meantime? Like, these revolutions are trying to dramatically and sometimes violently change the rules all of a sudden, but maybe that's because, like, every time they try to change the rules peacefully, they get stomped in by a violent state that doesn't care what it fucking does as long as they can continue their hyper exploitation.
Yes. This is jumping ahead a little bit, but this was one of my favorite quotes from this book. Capitalism condemns, quote, only those who act against an unjust status quo, not those who use violence to preserve it.
Yes.
Holy shit, that's good.
And this is the crux of the next section of whose violence, is that the U.S. and, Western imperialist core nations will say, oh, revolutionary violence, it's bad. There's violence, right? It's not good. But yeah, the reactionary violence of imperialist states, of states held up by American empire or serving it or what have you, though the violence that they visit on people trying to demand reform, that's not mentioned.
No, we don't ever look back to count those bodies.
And even, he says, kind of like social revolution generally starts out peacefully.
Yeah, why would you want to jump to war? Nobody likes it.
It's kind of, it's too much. Honestly, you're doing too much. But then it gets crushed, and then when they say, okay, well, hell, they're just going to attack us if we try to be peaceful, we're going to fight back. Then you're a terrorist. Then you're a violent, revolutionary, your means don't justify the ends or what have you, and you're not good.
There's a shout out to Kerala, which was kind of fun.
Yeah, I saw that. And he's clear in pointing out, like, hey, this is because the communists were, like, building this up, you know?
We had an episode on this, so if you want to go back and listen to it. But, long story short, they managed to drastically improve their life expectancy, literacy, all these factors by implementing communism, guys. Like, it sounds simple, but that's what they did.
But it is, because he says, like, it doesn't take, like, the Large Hadron Collider. It doesn't take, like, nationalizing Amazon because you have these humongous piles of wealth. Like, he just says it takes political will and a mobilization of popular class power. And that's, I think, the very scary thing to the capitalists, is that they, at some point, on some level, realize that I have built my castle upon sand, that I have such untold wealth and everything that I think it's going to give me everything in the world. But if everyone bands together against me, no matter how much my wealth seems to exceed theirs and everything, and it does, even with their just meager human flesh and bone, they can still take me on. Like, that's the weakness.
There's so many.
Yeah. And it just takes, like, popular mobilization. It's just this huge secret weapon that we have that they don't want us to use.
And instead they kind of, twist that into their own, like, fake mass movement of, again, getting us all on the same team, getting us all invested in the quote-unquote economy. Like, they have to construct this elaborate fabric to keep us loosely tied together so we don't notice, like, how tied together we are through our struggle.
For sure. And I like, in the end of this section, in the Who's Violent section, he kind of, like, calls out U.S. aid, like foreign aid programs and stuff. And he's kind of saying, like, these guys try to act like they are helping people, but they are really actually fucking things up, undermining the local markets, driving out small farmers. Where they are building up infrastructure and stuff, that's really like a roadmap that they're building, like the foundation for future multinational corporations to come in and just bleed the place dry.
Oh, completely. Like, remember in Open Veins, they built a whole rail system, and then they're like, actually, JK, this is for transporting, like, minerals and shit. It's not to, like, help you get around.
Yeah, it's just like, blam, here it is. We're going to aid you, but really, they're in it for the money. So yeah, from there he goes on to he rehashes some of the same points, which I think is pretty good examples and everything. There's the old Cold War State Department head, George Kennan, who is pretty honest about communism. And he's just like, these guys, they're complete assholes. The communists, they're essentially traitors. They're terrible. They are, quote, people who are committed to the belief that the government has direct responsibility for the welfare of the people.
What idiots.
Yeah, and he's just like, hey, if we can't do, like, liberal democracy or give people rights and shit, small price to pay for stopping those dirty Reds, Like, he's like, that clearly would go out the window.
Yeah, this other guy, Samuel P. Huntington from good old Harvard, says basically the same thing. Like, he's defending lesser evils such as Pinochet and apartheid.
Yeah, and anyone who's been, like, tortured by the Pinochet regime or, brutally repressed by the apartheid regime can tell you, like, there's not a less, there's...
That's a pretty evil
That is too
evil.
evil. It's lesser to nothing in terms of evilness. I thought that the section was pretty good at, like, calling out kind of the annoying sort of, like, oh, this guy, he's a dictator, but, like, he's not really bad. He's just kind of authoritarian or whatnot, like the benign dictators versus the really terrible, awful dictators who are like, oh, really, heads are rolling over there. And the distinction is left and right wing. I mean, like, right wing dictators
that we installed.
Yes. They're on a guy there. And they're really, they're a strong man and they're there to make sure that their country, sometimes they break a couple heads and stuff, but like they're there to steer their country on the right path. And then the other guy's maniacal. This guy is like, office rocker, he makes everybody get the same haircut and just anything that you can kind of exotify this person with. But this is the left-wing person who's obviously office rocker because he's trying to make everyone be paid the same or something.
He's trying to provide for his people? What?
Just, ugh.
Insane.
And then the last little bit of this section, he talks about friend of the show, glad he's dead, George H.W. Bush, lecturing none other than Nelson Mandela on the virtues of nonviolence.
I forgot about this.
And the man, hate him as much as you want. And for all the Iraqi blood on his hands, you should hate him a lot. But hate him as much as you want, he's got balls of fucking steel for quoting Martin Luther King to Nelson Mandela.
Wow. That is like, there should be a term for mansplaining, but like left-splaining.
And it's just astonishing. He met death far too late in life, but I just love that little gem. I'm just
so
like,
ridiculous.
How devoid of shame can you be?
How unaware are you? Like, what is happening?
Huh?
All right, this next section I basically called Grady's section.
Yeah, why?
That's the freedom section.
Freedom. He's a freedom guy.
He's such a freedom guy.
I love it. I was like,
oh my gosh, you could be best friends.
So he's kind of talking in this section like how people in these revolutionary countries, they support this revolution because, they were oppressed, and then they get liberated through these revolutionary movements. He gives the example of Cuba, he gives the example of Vietnam, and he's like, shit sucked, and so they freed themselves.
And then the other side of that is the narrative that we're fed, which is like, we are providing the freedom here. Like, actually, no, ours is freedom.
Yeah. And he's kind of counters that and says, to the extent that revolutionary governments construct substantive alternatives for their people, they increase human options and freedom. So he's like, actually, this is freedom. You're like, oh, I don't know. How is this freedom? But like, think about these popular freedoms that these governments extend, and he kind of details them here: women's rights, national self-determination, economic betterment, health and human life, and an end to oppressions in terms of ethnicities or class. Like, these are things you are freed from in this new system.
Absolutely. Like, it is, we've talked about this so many times on the show, is that, freedom to what? And at the end of the day, capitalism is freedom to pile money up if you're lucky enough. And the other side, our side, is actual freedom to pursue the life you want to live without having to worry about how to feed yourself, how you'll afford your next doctor's visit, what happens if you get fired because your boss is just a dick, like all those things. You have actual freedom.
And it's disingenuous for the United States to be talking about, oh, we want to bring freedom to this communist country, because when's the last time you heard the United States talking about bringing freedom to Saudi Arabia? When's the last time you heard them talking about bringing freedom to any of their other right-wing client states, any of the other authoritarian dictatorships that they're propping up?
Israel?
Yeah. Oh, Hosni Mubarak in Egypt was our guy there for 30-something fucking years. And then, he gets fucking taken the task in the Arab Spring, and we go looking at it like, wow, damn, Twitter's doing a revolution over there. Crazy. And it's like, motherfucker, you're the guy who put him in power. Fuck are you talking about? The Iraq War, we turn around all of a sudden saying, oh, wow,
what's
Saddam,
going on over there? It's crazy.
He's this madman dictator. I mean, like, you have Donald Rumsfeld up here saying, oh, he's a madman, he's a butcher, he's all these sorts of things. When back in the 70s, he was saying, I met with Saddam, he seemed like a nice, upstanding guy to me, because back then he was on our side. It's like these guys have absolutely no shame. This is how they can go and, quote, Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela is because they have absolutely no fucking shame.
The memories of goldfish, apparently.
And they know that they've done a good enough job with their corporate media to distract everybody.
Yeah, they're counting on us being distracted. They're counting on us not remembering.
Yeah.
They're counting on it.
We're tuning into the game this year, but we don't know the entire year of the team. We follow them whenever the Super Bowl's on. That's it.
Okay, so we talked about how do you measure freedom. Now we talk about how do you measure pain. You get this a lot of, well, the violence isn't worth it. Communism has killed however many people. And this flips it around and says, how many people's fucking capitalism killed? And not just killing, but also suffering. Like long work hours, child labor, just general exploitation. How do you measure that?
I think this was powerful to me in what it didn't explain. Basically, because it was like, you can't really codify it. You can't really quantify it. You're never going to know. Not going to know the potential that you lost. Not going to know this kid you threw down a mine and had him because he was smaller enough to get in or whatever. Like, you're not going to know what he could have done. He's done. He's washed out, Stunted lives, just suffering, people doing what they don't want to do because they have to make a living. There's so many, you as a listener have this experience in some form or fashion in your life, in your own life or people it's there. Yeah,
and it's the dichotomy of like, absolutely the third world has it way fucking worse. That's what we're talking about, children going into mines and stuff like that and sweatshops and all that stuff.
Which still exists. The Global South is still like being hyper exploited as you're listening to this, but...
Absolutely. But you can also apply this to your everyday life, too, of, why did I choose the job I have? Well, it's because I didn't want to starve on the fucking street. Is that normal?
Yeah. And that is not to draw a distinction between you and someone who's suffering in a lithium mine in Africa.
It's to connect you.
Yeah, that's your struggle is theirs. The person who is putting both of you through that's who we're trying to point you against.
All right, then we get some Cuba shout-outs. Loved some of these stats. They treated 13,000 children from Chernobyl. They had 25,000 students from the third world studying on scholarships in Cuba. They have some of the highest per capita rates of doctors, teachers, art instructors, sports instructors. Like, these are the numbers you don't hear about when you hear about Cuba. You don't get to hear about how they raised literacy by, magnitudes when they got in power. You don't hear about any of that. You just hear, oh, it's terrible there. Oh, it's a dictatorship.
Shout out to Fidel Castro. I remember I was out with my friends drinking at a bar when he died. And I was like, oh, man, he died.
Pour one out.
He guaranteed cited all of those statistics off the top of his head. He's a brilliant man, far sharper of a mind than I'll ever be. But yeah, and he juxtaposes this with before, where people in the rural areas of Cuba were living in makeshift shacks without minimal sanitation, where malnourished children went barefoot in the dirt, suffered the familiar plague of parasites common to the third world. This is what they're coming from. And then that's after the revolution where they end up.
Again, to draw it back to open veins and, general imperialism, that wasn't an accident where they started either.
Yeah, that's the weak links of capitalism and imperialism seem to be where the actual revolution takes place, and it's because that's where it's like claws have sunk the deepest. And that's where the bloodletting has been the most intense. And so that's where people are going to rise up from.
Not an accident.
I like how he says here that Cuba's sin isn't a lack of democracy. It's that, and here's his words here, it has tried to develop an alternative to the global capitalist system, an egalitarian socio-economic order that placed corporate property under public ownership, abolished capitalist investors as a class entity, and put people before profits and national independence before IMF servitude.
That's the real problem. We can't have people saying that that's an option.
If they do, you're going to start losing these outposts, these like places where your whole enterprise has been putting its claws in. You're going to start being hemmed in more and more, and you're going to get less of those like juicy, hyper exploitative bits to bring to bribe your own workers. And as that happens, as that sort of like, as you get weaned off of that and your workers back home get madder and madder because you can't give them anything, you're going to start facing a revolutionary potential at home.
It's all over.
And they know that. That's why they've been, since World War II and before, playing this, global game of empire. It's not for fun. It's not just some place to send your second sons. It's like a way to guarantee that you're going to continue to make money.
Definitely. All right, next. Let's, we got to clean house a little, because you know what we've got?
What do we have?
We have some anti-communism on the left.
Whoa, seriously?
I had no idea. Well, first, I think it would be helpful to define the left, because for me, I define, and I think this is because now the spaces, the circles I run in, for good or for evil, I view the left as more communist. I view the left as more anarchist. Progressive is the most center I get these days, I guess, in terms of who I'm following on Twitter.
No, I think Parenti here is being a little more generous, or maybe old-fashioned than that, of including like just the left, like not Republican.
Yeah, he's talking about Democrats here, basically. So when we use that language, that's who we're talking about.
Like sock them somewhat too, and that sort of vein. People who are uncomfortable with communism or socialism.
I mean, a lot of this gets into kind of rhetorical logic and the circles and knots people tie themselves into to say, like, oh, like I'm not racist and I, want people to, be more taken care of, but, XYZ.
Yeah, I really like his opening, if we could. So he gives like this damned if you do, damned if you don't thing of the Soviet Union.
That is the exact note that I wrote in the margins, by the way.
Which I think encapsulates to most Americans what you received about the Soviet Union in your upbringing.
I've heard almost every one of these things in reference to, if not the Soviet Union, as some sort of socialist or communist project. It's fascinating.
If the Soviets refused to negotiate a point, they were intransigent and belligerent. If they appeared willing to make concessions, this was but a skillful ploy to put us off our guard. By opposing arms limitation, they would have demonstrated their aggressive intent. But when in fact they supported most armament treaties, it was because they were mendacious and manipulative. If the churches in the USSR were empty, this demonstrated that religion was suppressed. But if the churches were full, this meant the people were rejecting the regime's atheistic ideology. If the workers went on strike, as happened on infrequent occasions, this was evidence of their alienation from the collectivist system. If they didn't go on strike, this was because they were intimidated and lacked freedom. A scarcity of consumer goods demonstrated the failure of the economic system. An improvement in the consumer supplies meant only that the leaders were attempting to placate a restive population and so maintain a firmer hold on them.
Insane. I mean, I've heard all of this shit that's so fucking funny. It's just such a great analysis of the way that these governments are held to an impossible standard.
Yeah, and you still see this. Any sort of actual existing socialist state, no matter what criticism you have of it, still faces these sorts of constraints in the Western media. I mean, North Korea, Cuba, Vietnam, China, they're all over the place in terms of what they're doing in their country, but like they still face this sort of like impossible criteria from Western media.
Yeah, criteria we do not apply to our own country, for fucking sure. Okay, what's next?
Gnome gets another L here.
Oh, yeah. He, again, does this very sinister characterization of the left, of these people are rising to power on the backs of mass popular movements, and then, quote, beat the people into submission. What the fuck, Gnome?
This is his characterization of, like, the Soviet Union. The entirety of it. He just says, oh, yeah, you came, you rose up, you did a revolution, and then boom, You turn on everyone.
Suddenly, you're just as bad as the other guys. Like, you're not a czar, so I think you're good.
This is and this is what's kind of strange about this. This is a guy that went to, like, Hanoi, that went to North Vietnam and, like, did, teaching stuff. He went to, like, to lecture in North Vietnam during the Vietnam War. North Vietnam, which was allied to the Soviet Union. What is he doing?
I don't know. I'm wondering, like, when were these quotes? I have a lot of questions about this. Like, what's going on, Noam? Do you need to talk? Are you okay?
What is that? That's in Z Magazine,
95.
October of 1995. So.
Yeah, so that's fairly... I mean, the book was, what, 96?
It's around there, yeah. And I think he correctly calls him out for poorly framing this collapse of the Soviet Union, saying, just some communist thugs were power hungry initially, and then they, like, quickly switched sides to the right wing. And Parenti is accurate in saying, like, it took decades of changing leadership and changing material circumstances and everything for the socialist project in the Soviet Union to be brought down. And even then, in those collapsing days, only some people became, like, outright capitalists. Like, there were people through the whole process that were like, no, let's, like, not do that.
And furthermore, like, throughout most of the process, some skirmishes aside, pretty nonviolent. Like, if the shoe was on the other fucking foot, as we have just talked about in the fascism chapters, that would not have been the case. If you have communists trying to take over, oh no, they're going to fucking smush you into the dirt.
And when the shoe was on the other foot, in terms of, like, the failed coup and stuff, Yeltsin didn't hold back with fucking tanks and shit shooting at the parliament buildings and everything. Like,
yeah, I didn't know about this.
Yeah, well, we're saving the meat of it for a future fall of the Soviet Union dramatic to at least parter for that. But Noam Chomsky's saying, these power hungry Reds, rising on the backs of this popular movement, and he uses this line, and I took it from him. This is where I got this line is. It's kind of crazy how those, like, power-hungry Reds always looking to, put themselves in the upper echelons of power. Like, weird how they, like, always side with the powerless. Kind of strange. Like, why would they do that?
As opposed to, the Nazis cozying up to big industry. Like,
Yeah, you could skip a few steps by just doing that instead of, going
to there was an option there.
And it's like, yeah, no, that's a perfect point is... how are they being nefarious by doing that?
Yeah, what is your evil plan? Like, I'm going to feed all the children.
I'm going to give healthcare to everyone.
If that's what it takes to be evil, then draw a fucking goatee on me. I'm in.
We got to start. So, the early, they started with the League of the Just and all that. And so we got to come up with, like, an evil version of that to do communism nowadays, since we're the bad guys now.
Yeah.
The Legion of Doom.
Skeletor actually just wanted healthcare. Not a lot of people know that about him.
Rehabilitate Skeletor.
Was he in the... I'm thinking of, I said Skeletor, but it's because they hung out in a skull. I don't actually remember who was in the League of Doom or whatever.
I'm sure there's a Skeletor. Communist comic book enthusiasts, hit us up.
Okay. I think he gets into a bit of the branding discussion, too, of how you're gonna get red baited anyway by the right. So, like, why the fuck are you tearing down the left?
Yeah. He gives the examples of the CIO purging their leadership, of just the Red Scares in general, of the American Democratic Action Group. All these, hey, we hate communists. Like, we're very anti-communists. What is their reward?
They get called... Joe Biden gets called a communist every fucking day. And God, how I wish that were true.
Commandante Joe Biden leading the glorious revolution. Not gonna
he does
happen.
look like Skeletor. I'll give him that.
We gotta socialize the means of production, Mac. My only Joe Biden impression element is Mac. That's all I've got.
Yeah, that's pretty much it for me, too. Maybe malarkey, throw that in there. I know he likes that.
The dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, that's a bunch of malarkey. I don't know. I don't got it. But anyway, he's not a communist. But, like, yeah, be as anti-communist as you like. you're still going to get smeared as it if you're anything to the left of Joseph Goebbels.
The perfect example in the news lately about forgiving student loans, like they forgave a pittance. It's a fraction of amount, and only if you met these qualifications. All these hoops to jump through, and guess who's mad at them? Everybody.
Yeah, $10,000 freaking dollars.
Oh, yay!
You can take one class you can take one class and
Literally.
get through like the first midterm, and then they're like, sorry, you gotta re-up your subscription, man. Like,
oh, insane. Let's see. Dunks on Orwell, which I always love that.
Good. He said, and I like this because he frames Orwell's, brave stand. I am bravely being anti-communist. Like, bro.
You mean like everyone else?
Yeah, you're in an anti-communist society. The whole thing. You are washing it. You are a fish swimming through water, and you don't realize you're breathing in the water. Like,
I mean, he's like the J.K. Rowling of his day of like, look how brave I am for being a bigot. It's like, I mean, okay, yeah. Congratulations.
And I love this because it's like, it's totally relevant to this day is like, because people, like you said, J.K. Rowling or whatever, this is still a tried and true pastime of the American right, of liberals or whatever, saying unpopular opinion, but, trans people don't deserve rights or whatever. Like, and it's just, no, dude, you're just saying what everyone else in your fucking society with positions of power think. And just because people on Twitter are going to give you shit because you are an asshole doesn't mean you're oppressed or anything like that. You're going to be fine.
It's that one. Have you seen the tweet where it's like the woman like has a sticker on her forehead that's a target, and she's like, "This is what it's like to be a conservative woman in America." And someone comments and is like, "I mean, yes, because you put that target on yourself."
Yeah. Orwell, a fucking loser.
Good. I'm glad this is a two-parter so I can leave that in.
I'm here all week.
Oh, God, I love this fucking quote from Murray Bookchin, a noted anti-communist anarchist. So, like, again, in our own goddamn house, we really need to get these people in line.
I do want to do a Murray Bookchin episode in the future. You've seen the things online where it's like Google Murray Bookchin?
Yeah.
He's like a meme. He's a narco, supposed to be a narco-communist or a narco, like, federative.
I mean, so is Noam.
Yeah, so he's in that vein.
Apparently, he once derisively referred to my concern for, quote, the poor little children who got fed under communism.
I love how he puts his words. Like, hey, this is this guy being an asshole.
Like, sorry, I care about feeding children. That seems like baseline shit, but you'd be surprised.
You'd be surprised, and it's because people love to discount the actual achievements of communism, and we'll get to this a little more in detail here. But I really like this quote, so this is one of my, I'm going to read it, sections.
Do it.
Where he's talking about the Soviet Union. And we've done enough episodes on it that I think this encapsulates sort of my view on it. The Soviet Union, a nation that endured a protracted civil war and a multinational foreign invasion in the very first years of its existence, and that 2 decades later threw back and destroyed the Nazi beast at enormous cost to itself. In the 3 decades after the Bolshevik Revolution, the Soviets made industrial advances equal to what capitalism took a century to accomplish, while feeding and schooling their children rather than working them 14 hours a day, as capitalist industrialists did, and still do in many parts of the world.
That last part is what I want to, like, tattoo on people's chests. Just, like, they did it, and also they took care of people. Like, people act like that's not possible. Like, and if you think about, like, okay, let's play this game. He's talking about, okay, they went from fucking serfs to, in how many decades? 3 decades? To pushing back Nazis?
Yeah. To being the MVP in that fight.
Okay, like, serf equivalent in the United States, what would that be? Colonial times, probably?
I mean, sharecroppers from the 1800s.
1800 sharecroppers. Okay, give you 3 decades on that. Where are you at?
You're in the 1920s. because he had sharecroppers all throughout. You're
yes,
basically
yes.
there.
And if you look at, okay, well, yeah, the 1920s, we were booming, we're doing great. Like, one, that's about to not be great. And two, what was that propped up on? Structural racism and, a history of slavery and Jim Crow and...
Yeah, and even at that point, you're thinking, there's still, like, we're not emancipating the sharecroppers then. Like, there are still sharecroppers then.
Yeah. It's propped up on exploitation.
It's incredible that they can do that. I don't know. It's fighting with one hand tied behind their back sort of thing. It's like, we're also doing all this.
Absolutely. Like, it just feels... Sometimes you just feel like you're being gaslit by everybody else. You're like, really? Like, you can just get healthcare and you can just get, like, a guaranteed job and, like, you will just be taken care of?
Yes. How will you do that? How will you do the way you do that is if the rich, the propertied classes, are terrified of what will happen if they don't do that for you. If they think they can take that away from you with nothing happening to them or their like body or their loved one, like they will do that. They will just take it away. Fear. I mean, that's kind of what it is. Yeah.
It is. And it's feels icky to think about that, like, oh gosh, can't we just work past this? But like at the end of it, no, they are going to take what they can get because they are fucking obligated to. That is the system that they have built.
Yeah, and the secret weapon that we have isn't, because we say, oh, fear. It's not going and threatening people. It's building mass capabilities. It's solidarity, mass movements. That's what we said earlier. That's our secret weapon. That's what they don't want us to know. There's more of us than there are of them.
Ooh, actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
I was interested, page 46, talking about people who are critical and on the left. He mentions that sometimes people will exclude Cuba from this as not talking negatively about them, which I was surprised by. I wonder if that's just a product of the times?
It could be. I think that Cuba did have more of a... so it was a little more recently on the stage. And especially early on in its history, it was sort of like a cos-celeb sort of thing of like, oh, look at the cool, bearded revolutionaries there. I mean, it was
all
like...
these hot guys down there.
Yeah, I mean, it was like 1959, 1960. And there was such iconography. I mean, they had great photographs and everything. And initially it was like, oh, they're not even Marxists. They're like just social revolutionaries in some vague form.
Oh, that's right, because Fidel's kind of stealth about that.
Yeah, and Fidel, honestly, I think was more nationalist than anything. He was just trying to get national liberation first. He was personally a Marxist, I'll say that, but he wasn't dedicated to making the whole project that until, like, the doors were closed, until America was not going to do any sort of cooperation thing, whereas they would do that with, like, Tito and stuff in Yugoslavia. I mean, that had already happened, so he has that as a template of like, I can play a middle ground between Soviet Union and them, and we can do that, that's fine. But when that's shut, then he's like, hey, Marxist fucking Leninism,
guess what?
That's what I do,
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't realize that was like, I guess I knew about that development, but I didn't think about it in terms of like how the U.S. viewed that.
Yeah, and I think that maybe in his time of writing this, a lot of older heads still kind of see it as like
a more legitimate revolution for some reason.
Sort of, or like, oh, it's a little countercultural and not like stodgy and old fashioned to be like kind of pro Cuba. One thing I like in here, in page 48, he dives in on left anti-communists or what have you, who will say, well, I can't get on board on that. There's too many crimes and too many atrocities and all this. And I have to be associated with like essentially a pure movement that hasn't done anything wrong.
You might want to like leave the United States.
Well, because they're like, well, this is why I support like, good, honest, peaceful politicians like Barack Obama or like Franklin Delano Roosevelt or any of the Democratic politicians in between there, the Democratic Party altogether. Like, this is the party that like their president said, yeah, there's no other way around it. Drop a nuclear weapon on civilians.
Round up Japanese people and put them in camps in the United States.
Not because they've spied on anyone, because they're Japanese. Like, do that.
Yeah.
If there's someone suspected of like leftist connections or whatever, like ruin their lives, like get them fired and blacklist them from everything.
Cause people to commit suicide.
Drop more bombs on the country of Vietnam than you dropped in World War II. That's probably fine. And like, do Agent Orange to their forests, because who needs that? Who needs a forest? Or like babies without birth defects. Who needs that? Just go ahead and, ruin their DNA for generations. That's the Democratic Party.
That's the party you're defending.
There's blood on the other party too. Come on, we would never defend the Republicans, but still, like
they're both bad is the point.
You can't get off and say, "Oh well, these guys are bad. I'm going to support something upstanding like these guys," because they're not upstanding.
They're really not.
And I think that he later on will say, "Hey, look, communist regimes have done bad things," and I think he's pretty honest about the things that he says that they did badly. So it's not like a, oh, what about sort of thing of like, oh, my guy never did anything wrong. But he's saying, like, if you're going to take this pure sort of route, you need to find a different home.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is equipped to do that math. Again, like, incalculable levels of suffering. Like, how do you quantify that? Like, that's impossible. But also, like, if you did the math, I'm pretty sure capitalism would lose.
Yeah, I think so, too. Pure socialism versus siege socialism.
All right, what are those terms?
So he says, okay, some people will come out and say, excuse me, you should not criticize this country because this is not real socialism. I don't advocate anything that happened in any Eastern European socialist state. I do not advocate anything that happened in the Soviet Union because that was not real socialism, sir. That was state capitalism. That was whatever-ism. That was not socialism to be defended by us or by real leftists. And anyone who's doing that is just, on a fool's mission. We shouldn't pay attention to it. We should ignore those. Those were aberrations. Those were dictatorships. They were bad.
One, it doesn't matter. You're going to get called socialist anyway. It doesn't matter. You're not making yourself more virtuous for anybody.
Yeah, that's a good point. For one, is you're still going to get dragged. Mm-hmm. But for another, I think the clearer point, the better point that he makes is like, look, these states are socialist in their way. Whether they were doing kind of market socialism or what have you, or state capitalism, their goal was markedly different from capitalist countries.
I think that's what you have to look at. And, jokes about impact versus intent aside, you do just kind of have to look at the intent. If you have a government structure that, apparently as crazy as it is, wants to feed children, that other quote of like, wants to provide for the welfare of their people, that's the communist one, guys. Like, that is what is, in their heart.
They're not going to do everything right, but that's who you should root for. I mean,
yeah, they're trying.
Yeah, these guys he spells it out. He starts kind of breaking it down. Like, here are the characteristics. Communist countries were way more equal than the capitalist ones. That's one of the things we were shocked at when we were doing our GDR episode.
Oh yeah, the drastic income levels, how much closer you were to making what your boss makes.
And he points out like, oh, the capitalist press comes out and says, oh, look at these lavish,
corrupt.
Yeah, like the insane kind of living conditions of their leaders and everything. And it's like, they live in a nice apartment with communal amenities that other people enjoy. It's like, can you imagine the Kardashians in a fucking community pool? Like, what the fuck,
Yeah, exactly. And it's so tame. Like, I always think about in Death of Stalin, seeing fucking Buscemi's apartment. I'm like, this is just a regular ass apartment.
It's just wild. He also kind of says, okay, some more key differences. The productive forces of those countries are not organized in the service of capital gain or private enrichment. Like, sometimes they will do some market socialism that does build up capital, or some state capitalism that does build up capital and does end up with, like in China's case, modern example, ends up with billionaires. That's a thing. And you can criticize, oh, maybe they shouldn't have that, whatever. But like, the goal,
we shouldn't have so many.
Yeah, the goal still ends up different, I think, from capitalist countries, is that it's goal is still in the service of the people. The whole boiling down to the dictatorship of the proletariat is still boils down to the aim of the working class. And when the aim of the working class is that billionaire X, Y, or Z doesn't have his billions anymore, but is in fucking jail, that's what they do over there. And so you can say, oh, maybe they're repressing, or maybe they're doing this, or maybe they're doing that, but they are sometimes bringing fucking rich people to heel.
Yeah, which God knows we don't fucking do. Third, focusing on human services. Again, like doing all of this crazy economic reorganization while also taking care of your people.
When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. Is doing what you do for the least of these, you do to me. I mean, this is like being a good human and gearing your society to provide for that. I mean, I fucking wish.
No, that we actively go against it. We punish poor people.
We have, what is it called? Hostile architecture.
Yes, hostile architecture. You know, again, means testing. If you even want to, okay, I'm going to get out of poverty. I'm going to get a job. If you're homeless, you got to have an address.
To get social services and stuff, right?
You have to have an address. All those things. There is a certain level of, like, required base level of income to access anything.
Being homeless is an obstacle to you getting help in our society. Whereas in, for example, what we said in our GDR episode, being homeless was like the fast lane to getting help. Like, if they noticed someone was out in the streets, they were like, whoa, hey, yo, what is happening? Like, what happened? Can we help you? Let's get you to an office. Let's get you somewhere where you can be. Yeah. Whereas in our society, also, this is a more social thing, but like we're more atomized. We're more fearful of engaging with people and just like talking to them and everything and like figuring out where they are. And that's deliberate. Like,
yeah. Oh, mass criminalization of homeless people. Like, yeah, that's not an accident.
We're supposed to feel this way so that we think of the homeless as where we would be if we didn't play the game.
Yeah. It's so we don't get outraged, too, because if you actually stopped and saw, you know, people who are struggling as people, it's overwhelming. Your mind would be full of rage 24/7.
And you have a lot of comforting things that are fed to you of like, oh, well, some people prefer that. And oh, well, some people, and we've heard this and stuff. They chose this in some way. That's something to pacify you.
Fourth in our list of communist traits. You're not trying to invade other countries to open them wide up for capitalism.
Yeah, and you're not trying to do aid in a way to like build the infrastructure for you to come in and extract from the place later. We were, again, I don't know. I spent too many weeks researching the GDR, I guess. And they were talking about like the kind of missionary sort of young organization they were doing where they were like going out and like helping them like do farm equipment shit. It was like not so they could export it later, but it was like, hey, so you guys can like do this in the future. Just be self-sufficient. I was like, damn, that would be cool.
Yeah. There's no ulterior motive. There's no, oh, you have to, you know, take this crazy loan that with these crazy strings attached. There's no, oh, you got to convert to this religion.
Make sure you're not given enough welfare.
I mean, basically, it boils down to like the people who are saying, well, there's no such thing as, you know, quote unquote, pure socialism or true communism or any of that stuff. It's just, it's unreasonable. It's an unreasonable expectation. It's just, it does not take into account any of the world's complications.
Yeah, I do like the last part, though, because he kind of shifts gears and is like, okay, hey, you know, what about like ANCOMs, basically, I think is what he starts talking about. Saying like the ideal socialism that some put forward of like free from bureaucracy, free from any sort of state apparatus or what have you. He says it's kind of vague. He's like, this doesn't try to figure out any of the problems that a revolution has to take on. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think it's possible at this point. Like there's a line here that says like, this is imagining what socialism would be like in a better world. And I think that's very true. You're in a world where you're not contending against capitalism trying to invade you every 5 fucking seconds. You're not contending with being blockaded. You're not contending with counter-revolution funded by the fucking CIA. You're not contended with any of those challenges. So, like, of course you can afford to be nicer.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. I think that, on the other hand, if, the initial impetus, if we're Spanish Civil War style and, like, hell, the anarchists pull it off,
Yeah.
I'm going to go with them. Like,
Oh, for sure.
And I'll be the Marxist-Leninist in their ranks saying, like, hey, what if we, like, start, like, a, fucking volunteer brigade to, like, make sure that we're safe from counter-revolutionaries? I don't know.
Shut up, man. Who invited that guy?
Yeah, get him out of here. I don't know. I would be trying to help. I mean, like, I don't know. I really don't ever want to be, like, sectarian of, like, oh, we should primarily focus on ridding our ranks of whatever.
I think my bigger issue, and I think this is what I'm interpreting Parenti's issue as well, is that we waste too much time in the weeds of, here's this specific thing I don't like about this specific person in power or whatever. And they use those as to say, well, that's why communism is bad, because this one thing happened. He says this earlier about, like, fascism too, but it's confusing the form and the, like, essence or something.
The form and the function.
Form and the function, yeah. So saying, like, well, because in this instance of communism there were bad things that happened, we gotta throw the whole man out. And it's like, hold on. I don't know if we need to do that.
I agree with that for sure. You can't condemn communist projects overall by saying, oh, here's a critique of one thing you did.
This isn't an accident. This isn't just like one guy had a cool idea, we tried it, it ended up bad. You hear that a lot of, like, oh, we tried it didn't work. I'm like, well, then why the fuck do we keep trying it? Because it's not just one guy.
Yeah. The next section, he kind of launches into full Marxist-Leninist here. He's like, okay, hey, if you're gonna do this right, you got to seize state power, break up those fucking bourgeoisie you were holding on, and then use this state to fight back against the counter-revolution. This is his whole argument. It's like, hey, why the ANCOMs, like, are kind of living in make-believe land is they think that this isn't going to happen, and so they're just like, oh, we'll just, like, fight back and he's like, you got to be prepared for this shit. You can't just, like, make it up as you go.
Yeah, and he uses the anarchists in Spain as a specific reference of, like, yeah, decentralization sounds pretty rad, like, that sounds awesome, but, like, it doesn't work. Like, we're not organized well enough to do that. Like, that's really fucking hard to do.
It sounds kind of funny, yeah. They're just, like, sitting around in their towns, like, we're the best. We're fucking
welcome
this town. Hell yeah. And then, like, the government just kind of stops by every town. It's like, fuck you, fuck.
Gonna take
like, just
you
one at a
and
time.
you.
And it's like, okay, well, honestly, what do you think, like, what could be the ANCOM response? Like, how could we fix that?
I think you have to get a little bit federated, and I don't know enough, I guess, about these towns that were trying to be independent, but, like, you can be independent and still work with other people to say, like, you have to determine a common enemy, you have to determine a common cause, and I think that's enough. I don't think you have to get into specifics of, like, well, you run my town now. You can just say, like, hey, we're all gonna, like, beat up these guys, right? Okay, cool.
I think they somewhat did that in the Spanish Civil War, too, is you had, like, big, huge anarchist militias and stuff. Like, they were fielding fucking armies. I mean, so they had some capabilities. It's not like they were just like, oh, I'm Valencia, I'm not going to do anything for anybody else. Like, they did cooperate.
Yeah, maybe that's an unfair characterization on Parenti's part. Like, again, they were facing off against, like, U.S. and British-backed forces. Yeah,
I think it's historically probably accurate in that, like, okay, you're in 1872, and maybe they didn't get it together that time, but I think, to me, I think it's kind of a shortcut to just be like, boom, bam, here we are. We already have a coordination of federation. It's the worker state, and we just do it,
Yeah.
But I think that then the anarchists could come at me and say, well, I have a shortcut to when you want to wither away the state. It's that it's already fucking gone.
Yeah, yeah. I think it is really just like, which one you want to do first, and are you prepared to actually do that, And then he talks more about the Soviet Union, kind of like their relationship with centralization. Like, basically the choices they were faced with of, like, okay, are we collectivizing? Are we, what are we doing here? And they kind of were backed into that by necessity.
Yeah, I think that was interesting because he's like, it may have been nicer and like more chill if they had gone like the more liberalizing, open, bourgeois democratic sort of, or like, parliamentarily democratic sort of system, more individual rights and these sorts of things. He's like, that may have been like a nicer society, but it may not have been the one that needed to be there to like defeat Hitler.
Exactly. Like they were between a fucking rock and a hard place, and and sometimes you get frustrated because you're like, God, I can't just sit here playing, Monday. What is the term? Monday football coach. That's not it.
Monday morning quarterback.
There we go. I like Monday football coach better. But this is what happened. Like we can't just go around saying what if to everything. But I get it. I get the qualms. I get squeamish about them too. God knows it. Like I'm the strike master. but like you can also see where they're coming from.
I agree with him though that
could have been better.
That it could have been better, but I think that probably may have been, and maybe it's wishful thinking. Maybe I think just want it to be worth it. Is that you had to do that too? I
mean, nobody knows.
Yeah, you don't. You have no idea. I do like his next section where he's talking about, he says, okay, yeah, Stalin did bad things. He's kind of tying this all together and saying anti-communists, who are on the left, when everything came tumbling down for the Soviet Union and Eastern European socialist states, they started kind of, they met this with glee, and they were like, this is good. An albatross off our necks, we're free from this weight of all the sins that we used to have to play defense for, and it's gone. Things will be good. But he says, actually, that made things worse. And this is an idea I've taken from him and really run with and internalized is, because the way he puts it is this, that this gave the green light to the unbridled exploitative impulses of Western corporate interests, no longer needing to convince workers that they live better than their counterparts in Russia. The corporate class is rolling back the many gains that working people in the West have won over the years.
Yeah. When were unions at their strongest? In the 30s, when we were trying to say, oh, please don't do revolution like Russia did. And then when did they weaken? Let me see. Pretty sure it's when the Soviet Union went away and we're like, oh, we don't have to worry about that anymore? Awesome.
What about civil rights? Civil rights was explicitly one of the things that they got the term whataboutism from, was because we would say, oh, the Soviets, you're doing this bad thing. And they would come out and say, hey, Jim Crow.
Hey, man. Have you looked around?
And so as a matter of national security, we had to be like, oh, well, we have to wrangle the South into not being as racist sort of stuff, that. And there's so many instances of that. It's not social contract in that sense of the word, but the capitalist class having to make concessions to people as kind of a bargaining position to say stay with us. You're still on our, we time back to earlier, you're still on our team.
Well, what it made me think of, and I don't know if he uses this exact term, he might later, it reminds me of postmodernism. He mentions in the beginning of the book the idea of, people saw the fall of the Soviet Union as an end of history. We're done now. We figured out that one doesn't work. We're not doing communism. So capitalism won, it's all over. And to me, that was as someone who went to art school, that reminded me a lot of postmodernism of nothing matters. Fuck it. This is the world we live in. It's fucked up. I'm just going to make shit. I've never vibed with it, and now it's great to now have a leftist reason to not vibe with it. But
yeah, no, it's fucked completely. It's just we're here, we're just going to stumble around until we die.
Yeah, it is the most nihilist point of view for sure.
Yeah.
All right, chapter 4, Communism in Wonderland. That sounds beautiful.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
That's the name of my new theme park.
It's not that uplifting. Its description in the table of contents is the internal irrationalities and weaknesses of past communist economies and the systemic reasons why productivity stagnated and reforms were so difficult to effect. Sounds tough.
Yeah, okay. I have questions on this section, actually.
All right.
I mean, mostly like theoretical questions, not like look up shit for me.
Okay. I didn't look up much stuff here.
No.
Okay, good.
So in the first section, it's talking about kind of how the way the Soviet Union in particular was set up with central planning, it was inherently a problem. At one point, that he says that like no computerized system could be devised to accurately model a vast and intricate economy. To that, I say, I guess this was 1996 technology, because I think we can do that now.
Yeah, we can totally do it now. I mean,
yeah. Okay.
we can, and essentially we could decentrally centralize it. You could have different aspects of the economy all optimizing themselves, and then networking to optimize the collaboration. You could do it, is what I mean.
You could totally do it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then he gets into kind of specific reasons of disincentives for innovating. Managers were little inclined to pursue technological paths that might lead to their own obsolescence.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a boomer boss.
Not rewarded for taking risks. You know, you are guaranteed a job, so, like, you don't need to struggle to stay employed. I don't want to go through all these because there's so many.
Sure, yeah. What are the ones that raised questions for you?
Okay, so I think the basic thesis of this section is that when you centrally plan an economy, you're going to run into some issues, a lack of innovation, a bloat of bureaucracy, you know, not enough consumer goods. Oh, and like kind of coddling poor performing industries by subsidizing it. And basically my question is like, what do we do about this?
So that's a good point. I think that it's important to note that they were centrally planning an economy at a point in time. So, I mean, they were doing this at once. And one of the things I think you should build into your economic planning model is points at which you, like, mandate that you change it. You know, because, I mean, several of these are like, hey, I'm not going to change the system because that would eliminate my own job.
Yeah, and I think you have to do some restructuring every now and then to say, okay, that's fine. It's okay if that job goes away. Like, you're going to get another job.
Yeah, we'll pension you off to a fucking docket and wherever. Like, that's fine.
Yeah.
But, like, we need someone new, or you're welcome to do it. But, like,
you
if
can
you
get
don't,
retrained, whatever.
You know, yeah, well, you know, we'll pay for you. You did your time. But, like, we need somebody to run the new system. I mean, like, I don't want to be teaching in whatever manner is being taught in 50 years. I don't want to do it. I ain't going to have any part to play in it. No, absolutely not. Juice me. If we're down the dark enough road to where it's juicing or that, just juice me, dude. Do it.
You heard it here first. This is a living will now.
Yeah, exactly. But, like, it has to. So I think what I'm saying is that centrally planning a vast or any size economy like this needs to have built into it ways to, like, schedule changes as you go. You can't rely on ad hoc changes because your bureaucratic impulse is going to kick in and people are going to protect what they have, and you're not going to want, you're going to continuously push back the date at which you might revise it. Instead, you have to have dates where you're going to say, we are going to change what we're doing. And maybe you decide, hey, it's all working fine or whatever. But, like, you have that, like, built-in potential pit stop.
That's really interesting because I think this shows our different stripes here, because you went with like a mandated, every 5 years we're going to change it. My answer was, let's go more ANCOM. Let's be more flexible.
All right.
Let's go more on the local level and be like, all right, like, what's going on here? Like this town is struggling with XYZ. What can we do?
So, like, the more Yugoslav model of, like, the market socialism, sort of like, different firms doing their things and, like, coordinating, or like the Chilean sort of, like, feed up.
The Chilean supercomputer. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that too. I think, I don't know, I guess I was thinking kind of in their terms, what was the big hang up is that they planned this all sitting down in 1930 whatever, and then they just kept doing that.
It reminds me, so I went to Vegas this weekend, and I'm not a gambler, but I did try to play roulette, and I got to a point where, like, I'm just going to keep betting on black. It has to be black at some point. And, like, no, I lost all my money.
Yeah. Like, it has to work eventually. And I think that, like, one big thing is, like, providing payouts maybe to people so that they're not like, damn, what if I do this and, like, I get fucked up in some way? Like, it's fine. We'll let you do something else. Because so many of these are like, oh, I didn't want to risk it. Like, I didn't want to make myself obsolete. I didn't want to help somebody else out, their department, at the expense of my department. I wanted to hoard supplies for my own group so that, because I know supplies are scarce. There's a ton of this stuff that it's like, a ton of this stuff, honestly, is like, it's the product of siege socialism. It's the product of being at war with the rest of the world because you're a socialist country and they're not.
Yeah. And I think it's also a product of, like, having been in a capitalist system. Like, you are not used to having a job being provided for you no matter what. And I don't know, this chapter was very interesting because it brings up so many of the common arguments against communism as an economic system, as like, oh, there's no innovation, oh, there's bureaucracy, oh, there's
favoritism, corruption.
Yeah, all that stuff. And this, I think this chapter is like, you know, yeah, there was some of that.
And does raise questions because they were talking about the discipline in the workplace.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I mean, you know, before it was the term de vogue now of like quiet quitting.
Quiet quitting, God.
It's so obnoxious now to see it because it's just capitalists wringing their hands of like, are you serious? I'm not going to get more free labor from this person. But back then they were saying like, oh shit, like this guy's guaranteed a job. Like he's being as lazy as fuck as possible for me. Because he could just literally leave and get another job. You know, so I was thinking, well, it does kind of suck. Because you are getting pretty poor performance for not so that, like, you know, it's going to take you 6 more months to get your third yacht. But, like, so that the people can produce enough shit for themselves. But on the other hand, I was thinking, like, it's kind of good, right? Like, this guy does have enough security to where he can kind of blow off his job when mentally he doesn't really feel like doing it. It's kind of humanistically good for his needs.
I think so. It's good on an individual level for sure. Like, yeah, I'd love to just like dick around. But like, I do see it as a problem more socially, or more like you then have to figure out like, how do I motivate people? Like, I think that's when propaganda comes in. I think that's when you have to like really, you have to be on that, or else this kind of stuff will happen. Like, you have to continually ensure you're on the same page.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking is like, what could we do for this? And I was thinking that your vein would probably be like propagandize, like make it cool, like inspire.
Make it cool.
Yeah.
I think part of making it cool would also help alleviate the other problem in the next section of wanting it all. Like we talked about this in GDR, is that people took the things they had for granted and then turned their eyes towards, you know, wanting more consumer goods and wanting what the West has, without realizing like that obviously comes at a cost. So like you have to do a lot of educating and a lot of, I mean, celebrating maybe too, of, you know, we can't be sad all the time. So of saying like, look at what we have achieved. No one else is fucking doing this.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the brilliant things he highlights is that over time, people forgot how bad things used to be. They forgot the liberation from the Tsar. They forgot the ruin of the Second World War. They forgot the oppression of the French in Indochina. They forgot all of these things, and so then the later generations were not as appreciative of it. And they say like, oh, those were our parents' slogans, you know, and that was good for them, but we want more. And what they want is the good part. I mean, like they want it in addition to. Yeah. They assume that they're going to keep what they've got, the good, hard-won concessions and living standards that they have from a worker state and everything, but they're just going to add to that the luxuries that are constantly advertised to them by the CIA, by the Defense Department, and everyone else in the American sphere that's like pumping out propaganda to them. We just want like the good, shining, glittering facade that they are selling us, on top of the egalitarian world that our parents and that we kind of begrudgingly have, fought and bled and died for to build.
And I think, too, some of it is to blame on, like, the absolute dominance of the United States and, like, culture.
Yes.
Because they have these ideas of what the United States is like that's just completely false, of just like, yeah, everyone there is better off than we are. The poorest among you are richer than we are. And you're like, I don't think so, buddy.
Yeah, no. And I mean, getting into like kind of grander pictures of it, it's kind of like, I mean, it's fucking sexy. It's like, the fucking cowboys and stuff. It's like, we're fucking lone, rugged individualists, and we're like an adventure movie hero sort of figure.
We're the main character.
and that's like packaged and glittered and sold to the rest of the world. And it's hard to resist that, especially when it's kind of forbidden too. Like, that's another kind of psychological aspect of it, is like, it's kind of cool because you're not supposed to like it.
Your counterculture. I mean, it's like the horrible, sorry, young people. It's like the horrible, like, the trads now who are like, oh, I'm so counterculture because I'm like Catholic and like conservative. And you're like, no, you're just a dick.
So I think ultimately when we come down to it, and he kind of closes this whole chapter out by presenting siege socialism, what we kind of started the whole concept with, of like, we're at war with the rest of the world and we can't have all the nice things, but we can survive. Saying like that whole paradigm, that whole like, we can do what we can to survive, siege socialism thing, allowed the Soviet Union and Eastern European socialist states to survive. Good. They succeeded at that. But at the same time prevented them from building past that, from thriving into, and we're looking at the economic system, like, how could we make this work? Because of the foundations that we were built on, we really couldn't, because we were dedicated to building up enough of an industrial base to fighting for our survival in 10 years against the Nazis. We really couldn't then, add on to that, like a little resiliency and, change and being able to change directions and stuff. Like, the seeds of where they started slowly pushed them toward, and they could change along the way, don't get me wrong, but they didn't, pushes them towards this like stagnation where they eventually like end up looking at the West, hungry kid in the shop window. I want that,
It's funny because, I mean, we talk about socialist projects, being antagonized by the West and how detrimental that is to their development. But in a way, it's also kind of good for their development. It gives them something to fight against. It gives them something to rally around and to, have. Whereas when you still had it, don't get me wrong, like, we were fucking with them the entire time. But when it's maybe less prevalent or there's an uneasy piece, I'm wondering if then you have to find a new thing to work towards. You have to find, again, that new exciting propaganda.
Because if you just start saying, hey, these guys are kind of nice, what if we just start like doing their nice shit? Then you end up with the rest of this.
Oops, section. You're capitalist.
Yeah, and you end up getting destroyed.
Okay, so obviously this is going to be a two-parter. We have a lot to say about this book.
Feelings were opened up, so here we are.
Okay, join us next week for part 2. We'll cover chapters 5 through 9.
It'll be good. It'll be great. Tell all your commie friends to listen to it.
All right. Talk to you next week.
See ya.
And bye. Hey there, comrades. Just jumping in to remind you of all of our social media. We are on Twitter at teachcommunism, Instagram at teachmecommunism. You can shoot us an email. That's teachmecommunism@gmail.com. Any of those places are good to send us an episode suggestion or a question, anything you think would be useful feedback for us, or just your admiration. If you want to admire us in a public manner, and you should, you can go to Apple Podcasts to give us a review. It is the best way to help people find the show. Love when people rate and review us. Please do both. We are also on YouTube, if that's how you prefer to listen to podcasts, or if you know someone that's the only way they'll listen to podcasts, send them to our page. And we have a Patreon. For $5 a month, you get access to our notes for each week's episode, including the backlog of notes, which is a very handy resource for up-and-coming commies. And at the end of the year, all of the funds from Patreon will be given to local mutual aid in the DFW area. So, ain't going to line our pockets. Finally, we have merch. Check us out at TeePublic. You can find shirts and I believe also stickers and magnets and all kinds of fun stuff with catchphrases from the show or episode art, stuff like that. The link to that store is in the show notes, so check that out. Okay, that's all the internet. Join us next time for another episode of Teach Me Communism, where the class struggle is always in session. Bye, y'all.